Hi, I'm Eric Nathan. I'm the composer in residence of the New England Philharmonic.
Hi, I'm Danny Maddon, and I'm the concertmaster of the New England Philharmonic.
We welcome you to Listening In, a deep dive into the music with the New England Philharmonic. It's a series where we speak to composers and performers about their art and work, but also to help our audiences hear this music, taking a step behind the scenes as well to see how the music is made, how it was inspired, and also how performances of it have come together. And the guests we have invited to join us this year are those who we had programmed to work with this year before the season was postponed due to COVID. But these are also guests who will join us next year for the NEP season. And so I'd like to invite you as our audience to submit questions in the chat, and we'll get to these at the end, but we might have time to take a look at some of them during the hour. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome Stefan Jackiw and Yoonah Kim, our two performers who were to have joined us exactly a year ago on April 25th, 2020 for the Boston premiere of my double concerto, and now we have them here today, which was actually the date of the postponed, rescheduled performance, and then we'll hopefully have that next spring for you as well. So welcome, Stefan and Yoonah.
Thanks for having us.
Hello, everyone.
So it's wonderful to have you all here, and just wondering how you guys are holding up these days in New York.
Yeah, we're doing okay. We actually had a nice evening last night. We took out our scores to your piece and opened a bottle of wine.
Listened to it, talked about it.
Yeah, brought back so many happy memories of just like, learning the piece on our own, Yoonah doing her part, me doing my part, and then rehearsing at our home together. And then the first few rehearsals with the orchestra, and then watching the performance last night. Such a fun time.
Yeah, for me, rewatching it after 2 years now already, kind of was a newer experience for me, because I think back then I was very nervous about premiering a new work, and but this time last night I was able to enjoy it even more, I think, and I'm really, really excited to play it next season. I hope to schedule it, right?
Yeah, me too.
Well, at the NEP, we really are so excited to be working with you both and with Eric, our composer in residence. And we were wondering, Eric, if you could tell us about the genesis of this piece. How did you come to write this concerto?
Yeah, so it originated with the invitation from Dongmin Kim, who's the music director of New York Classical Players, and it also I met Stefan at a NYCP concert, who also said that he was interested in having me write a piece for him and Yuna. Though I think it was a step before. I think this was all a brainchild of Yoonah, Stefan, and Dongmin, and wondering maybe Stefan and Yoonah tell us this is a interesting instrumentation of clarinet and violin with strings, and I think when we were initially talking about it, we were thinking, is there any other work written for this instrumentation? We found the Carl Stamets concerto, but it's hard to know of much else. But I love the instrumentation, and was curious your thoughts on this.
Yeah, while there isn't much for clarinet, violin, and string orchestra, there are a couple real masterpieces for string quartet and clarinet. So 2 violins, viola, cello, kind of like a reduced string orchestra, plus featured guest of clarinet. And in particular, I'm thinking of the clarinet quintets of Mozart and Brahms. Those are 2 of my favorite works. And sort of as a string player, I'm used to playing with other string players in duos, trios, and quartets. But there's something about the timbre of the clarinet, sort of like the openness and kind of naivete, or maybe that's just the way Yoonah plays, that I really love, and actually is something that I'm drawn to just in all music. I love that timbre that the clarinet has, and I thought it would be really nice both from a musical perspective, but also from a personal perspective for us to have a piece that we could play together and kind of work to.
I think it was very special because this was actually the first piece we've ever collaborated together.
Mhm.
Before that, we never got a chance to play together, let alone just even, we never read music together before.
Right.
I mean, during the pandemic though, however, we read a bunch of duos because we weren't playing music with other people. So we missed chamber music. So we got to do that then. But yeah, I think we had talked to Dongmin about a possible like double concerto. For those of you who might not know, we're a couple and we actually just got married last year. And so yeah, it was so special to have this piece commissioned for us by Eric, because we'll talk about it later too, but I feel like this piece just kind of generally summarizes our relationship. Yeah, so.
Well, it was really, oh, sorry, Danny, but yeah, it was really, I just wanted to add one thing. It was really helpful to me when we met over drinks near where you live and chatted about ideas for this. And I remember Stefan talking about the Mozart clarinet quintet and saying how he felt the clarinet is sometimes in these contexts almost like an invited guest. And that really stuck with me as I began to think about this, how to write a double concerto and why is there a clarinet, why is there a violin soloist, and why is there a string orchestra? And I think we'll see that the clarinet does make its entrance a little bit into the piece, but its entrance is, and its role, I think, is central to the whole structure of the whole work.
So I was wondering how, Stefan and Yoonah, how did your experience of this concerto change from the time when you were learning your parts to the time when you actually got together with Eric and rehearsed it?
You know, for me, right from the beginning, when we received these parts in the from Eric, and you know, there's no prior recordings to sort of like get some information on the piece. It's all of it's in the score. And I, especially at the beginning, as you'll hear, the opening is this sort of rhapsodic lament, I would say, in the solo violin. The clarinet doesn't enter until a few minutes in. And I was practicing this opening a lot at home, trying to sort of figure out what I thought was most kind of what made most sense to me about how to approach it. And I came up with a way of playing it, and it was quite, I think in retrospect, my initial interpretation of the opening was quite angst-filled and fraught and kind of agitato feeling. And we went to the first rehearsal and Eric was there and I played it, and Eric had something in mind, which he actually indicated in the score, and I think maybe I didn't kind of follow closely enough. He writes espressivo cantabile, so expressive and singing. So not quite so kind of like riled up yet, but kind of more soaring, I would say. And I used the word lamenting earlier. So rather than sort of furious, kind of more forlorn, I think. And so that experience of sort of coming up with what I thought the way I wanted it, and then having my eyes opened by the composer to this other, actually more convincing way of approaching it, and then trying to adapt to that way, and then finally actually feeling more comfortable in this new way, was something that you don't really get to experience very often unless you're working with a composer who's there giving you feedback right then and there.
Well, I wonder if we could start to talk about the piece itself. Eric, it's so interesting that this double concerto starts as if it's a violin concerto with a nice, I mean, as a violinist, of course, I love it. But the clarinet does wait a good while before her entrance. And we're wondering in the orchestra, what you thought about that. How did your concept of that evolve? And how are you using the string orchestra?
Yes, so I was thinking about the this concept of the double concerto, and thinking about past double concertos where you may have the two soloists playing in harmony a lot or trading off phrases in short succession. And I felt a little bit restricted by the convention of this concept of the double concerto. And so when I started this work, it was almost a little bit of a rebellion against it. I wanted to think, why do we have these characters and what do they mean? I was influenced by the Sibelius Violin Concerto, a piece that I've really loved since I was a kid, and this kind of icy, desolate landscape that it presents at the beginning. And so this work kind of takes that as a starting place. And so I feel like we find ourselves in like the tundra or somewhere very desolate, and the violinist is just alone and lamenting. And so I wrote, and I just decided I'm just going to follow this character, the violin, perhaps as our protagonist at the beginning, and see where it leads me. And so it was actually a leap of faith that I kept following the violin around for about 6 minutes, and then I remember this one day, and I figured out, this is why we have the clarinet. And I think I posted on Facebook or something saying like, so great when the piece finally shows its head to you. So this moment, I feel when the clarinet enters, it is quite unexpected, but also I think it's the kernel of like what this piece is about in the end. So I guess I've put up here the opening, which we can see I marked desolate. And you see this really high note in the violins here, and very, very low pitch in the double bass, which is the lowest note on the double bass. So kind of this atmosphere of just a sense of space. And then the violin begins this line. And as Danny mentioned, the lamenting motive here, which you can see, which in essence just a scale that comes down, and then it comes down, then leaps back up again, another scale that comes down there again. And as you see here, we have something called glissando, where the violins in the orchestra smear, kind of take one pitch and then move their finger down the string. And I was thinking of this, a texture, as you can start to see on the second page, of these almost wailing laments of almost like a cascading waterfall that kind of comes off of the pitches that the violin is playing here. So I wonder if we just take a quick listen to this opening page, just to get this in our ears before we chat a little bit more about it. So here's the opening.
That's just so beautiful. And the glissandi in the string orchestra just weeping down as if to say, I'm so sorry, to the solo violin. It reminds me of, in a way, it reminds me of ice dripping too. On the page, you see the drip between the notes, and visually as well as sonically, it's riveting, and it's just so moving. Stefan, what were your thoughts? And the beautiful portamento you put, the slides between the notes were so vocal. What were your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the word you used, weeping, is exactly what came to mind, both when I was kind of working on this and also just listening to it just now. Actually, Eric did indicate some slides that he wanted in between the notes. I think also, a slide, what it does more than anything is it highlights the distance between note A and note B, right? Because it kind of emphasizes the traversal that you have to go on in order to get to the next note. And I think Eric was talking about how the opening in the first chord highlights sort of like the very lowest note that you can think of, and this very end spanning all the way to the very top. And so just sort of like highlighting the chasm of range with the slides, I think is something. Also, that repeated fragment of is a very weepy sighing rhythm, in addition to being sort of a weepy sighing pitch group. So yeah, I think I feel very similarly to the way you feel, Danny, about that opening.
It's just so moving. And then as we progress a little further along in the piece, now comes a second theme in the solo violin. Instead of falling, it's rising this time. And it's quite lyrical. And I was wondering, it seems to come back several times in the piece, sort of at the beginning of new sections. And Eric, could you tell us about this theme and how you're using it throughout the piece?
Yeah, I can play this briefly on the piano here, this highlighted in red. So there's kind of this feeling of rising and yearning, but also a clarification near the end. And it's in essence almost like some sort of scale, but it has all these leaps and falls and turns, like you're getting closer to your final goal, but it's but there's kind of a reaching difficulty to get there. But when you finally do, we're ready for it in a sense. So this motive is like a idée fixe that comes back between every major section of the piece, and it's at the very end too. It's what the cadenza is constructed around, helping the violin, the clarinet teaching the violin this motive again that it perhaps has forgotten, and maybe a way to finally stand back tall after the collapse in the piece that has happened before.
The other interesting thing about both of these motives, this rising one and the falling one, is it really takes advantage of the range of the violin from low to high, and it continually showcases those leaps, but in a really expressive way. And as a violin player myself, I thought that this piece was beautifully written for what the violin can do expressively. Stefan, did you find that as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also such attention to detail. I mean, I can't circle things in the score, but if you look at the passage that Eric has highlighted, right before figure 32, we have this two quarter notes, F natural and G natural. And if you look, he wrote these little dashes over those two notes, that's kind of tenuto marks. And it's funny, Eric mentioned a few minutes ago that he kind of had Sibelius Violin Concerto in his ear. And Sibelius Violin Concerto is filled with these dashes, which sort of like, to me, similarly to here, sort of expresses the difficulty of rising. Like it's not just a fleet run up. Da yada da 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 ton ton ton. Like all these little indications tell such a story to someone who's studying the score and figuring out how to play it. So that's just a little detail that you can do with your bow that totally changes the meaning and sort of like the difficulty of that journey to rise up.
Yeah, I really feel. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I really feel that when I write music, it's these markings, the phrasing, the dynamics, the articulation that really speaks the text, speaks the meaning of the music. And I don't know if I ever told Stefan or Yoonah this, that when I composed this piece, I actually pretended to play the instruments. So I took out my baton and pretended I was playing the violin, and I recorded a video of myself doing the gestures of this opening section. And I feel like how one plays this and how one leads to a pitch tells such meaning, just like an actor might, and how they act out a scene. And so then I transcribed, in essence, improvisation. I have a clarinet that my brother gave me. I don't play it, but I held it when I was writing your parts, and just trying to get the feeling of the breath and how that tells a story in itself in some way. But yeah, maybe we can take a listen to this opening section. So it begins with the lament and ends with the rising theme, and that will be about 2 minutes of music. Here we go. Oh, you're muted, Danny.
I love that opening.
The way the rising thing comes out of that haze of the string orchestra at just the right moment. It's psychologically, it just feels very meaningful at that moment to rise after the violin has been doing back down, again down. I think it's 3 times down, and then finally, as Stefan said, the markings you put on the last 2 notes of the rising imply effort to get there, and it's just an incredible moment. And as beautiful as it is, let's talk about the clarinet entrance coming up, because that also is a stunning moment. As we said, for the opening of the piece, Eric kept the soloists apart for a while. And a good deal later, I think, Eric, did you say 6 minutes in, you brought in the clarinet ever so quietly, emerging imperceptibly from the violin line. And I'm just amazed at the breath control, Yoonah, there. What was that like for you as a performer, standing for 6 minutes and then coming in flawlessly?
Yeah, that was actually the most challenging part for me, I think, in this whole piece. First of all, as a wind player, our reed, we use a reed, and the reed gets dried up. So like that's some of the technical things that I think about while Stefan's just playing this hypnotizing, beautiful opening. So it's scary. It's scary, but I always get goosebumps whenever it's the time for me to play, because I'm joining in from a niente, which is from nothingness. It's a dynamic that you can't even hear when the clarinet is actually starting the note. And the clarinet is just holding this high pitched sound from niente to still piano, crescendoing very, very slowly to a forte. And it's not like a bam introduction where here's the clarinet. I'm kind of camouflaging in the string section and within Stefan's sound, and then blooming. And then, of course, slowly, as the piece goes on, I develop my own sound. And but yeah, it's a scary opening, but I always get goosebumps whenever I have to play it and I hear it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I also love, in addition to sort of emerging from my sound, she's literally taking over my pitch.
Yeah.
So
we're going sol, la, si, and we're coming in.
Right. So it's actually that same closing theme, don, da, don, da, the rising theme that we've just been talking about. It comes again. And on the last note, at some point, but we can't really tell where, the violin sound is joined by the quietest clarinet sound you can imagine. And then they sort of like dovetail at the same pitch.
And then clarinet takes over.
And then clarinet takes over.
Yeah.
Which I think is like a very, very beautiful way of introducing the new instrument rather than, and here I am.
Exactly, right.
It's so interesting how there's, in a concerto, you always think in a double concerto, oh, it's a competition and we're going to show people. But this piece is it's such a dialogue. It's more like a narrative than it is a competition between the 2 soloists. But that handoff, Stefan and Yoonah, was so that it dovetailed so perfectly. You could almost not tell, when you emerged, it was beautiful. And Eric, what was your concept of that clarinet entrance there?
Yeah, I thought of it. The image I had in my mind was if you were in this tundra landscape, maybe on the top of a mountain, and then there's one little flower that you see growing. And so there's some little life that's beginning to come out. Because I feel like the whole opening, the violin is in pretty desolate, dark, lamenting place, and where perhaps they have lost almost all hope. And at this point, the clarinet is there to help them move forward. And, as I wrote this piece, I was thinking maybe initially that this is another character that's coming to help. But by the time I ended, I wondered maybe this character of the clarinet is just a vision within the violin's world, and that it's like the inner strength coming to help you lead forward. So the section that follows, there's a long chase, and it's almost like the clarinet is helping lead the violin someplace better in some way. I thought I could show a little bit behind the curtain, if you will, about what's going on in this section. Here we pull up the slide. So as we just mentioned, that you see up here that rising theme in the violin, and then as we described, it arrives on the A, and at the same time you have this A in the clarinet marked niente end period that then blooms out of it. And under here we have that same rising motive again in the violin, but this time you see the rhythm is a little bit different, because I felt like here the first time we heard it, it's just like how it's always been, but now the violin perhaps is a little bit surprised. Oh my goodness, there's this blooming clarinet that has just come, and now it's almost like, let me talk to you. I have something to say. Will you, what does this actually mean? Can I have a conversation? So there's a little bit more urgency to the next time that they come in. Behind this, there is a influence from Johann Sebastian Bach, who's a composer that I've been very in love with his music for a long time, and I have a suite of orchestrations of Bach's music, and this prelude actually inspired incidental music that I wrote for a disc clavier piano for puppet play. But here it has a different purpose, and so I'll play you just a little bit of this prelude. Maybe you've heard it. So you may recognize that. What I did is that this inspired the voice leading of I have a trio of muted strings that hold very still pitches that provide almost like this very meditative landscape, on top of which the clarinet leaps and turns and almost like wanders freely in a field, for instance. So if you take a look here at the first measure, and you can see this chord that's played in succession. If you look over here, if you take these pitches and you have them all vertically, you can create a harmony here. And then for the next chord, you can do this the same with the next bar. You can have this harmony here. So what I did is I took this idea of Bach has these chords, and as you can see, some of the pitches remain the same. Like this note C remains the same, the G remains the same, this pitch, these pitches remain the same between each chords. But there's just one pitch that shifts, and this shift really makes the whole difference. You can see these are the shifts. So I could play beginning with this chord. There's like one note makes a whole world of difference here. And so if you take a look here, this is where the clarinet comes in, and then we have the strings also emerging niente to have this texture here. I've then made a reduction here of what the harmonies are, and as you can see here as well, we have just subtle voice leading shifts between each of these chords. I can go through and highlight a number of them for you. There's two in that one. And I can just play this one chord at a time. So between these, there's like a whole, it's slightly morphing with this intimacy, but getting both happy and more mournful sounds. Just something that if it's of interest, at the beginning, those lamenting strings that you heard are actually following the same idea of this descending path. And so if I change my sound here to strings, we can hear this. So it's this kind of subtle descent that's actually present throughout much of the piece. So it's an homage to Bach. I tend to be inspired by music of the past and wanting to stand on the shoulders of composers I admire. So perhaps we take a listen to just a bit of this to hear it before we move on.
Yuna, you sound so good.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's like velvet. It's amazing how consoling your clarinet sounds after the troubling passages that come before. And a little bit after this incredibly magical clarinet entrance and beautiful sort of rhapsody over these Bach progressions, which are so, tense, released as each of the suspensions steps down and resolves. It seems that a little bit later, the string orchestra gets agitated. And I'm noticing there's a section coming up that you mark, Eric, wildly agitated and racing. Lots of running 16th notes in the orchestra that sort of compel the two soloists to come in with 16th notes of their own. I was wondering, Eric, if you could tell us what the idea is here.
Well, I think it was a bit of a chase. Now I think the strings are almost chasing the two soloists, and maybe the clarinet's leading the violin away from them in some way. So there is a lot of intensity here, and you can see here the violin and the clarinet trading off now in sort of short succession. The first time that they're playing together, but actually they don't really play at the same time yet for a little bit of time. But here, running away from each other, perhaps.
One thing that I love about this section, yeah. Do you want to say it? We were talking about this yesterday. I guess we both love it.
Yeah.
Is so like the violin obviously has that long introduction, and then the clarinet kind of comes in a little bit tentatively, like as if like kind of following the violin's lead a little bit. But at this point, it seems like the character of the clarinet has evolved into more of the instigator rather than maybe the follower, because I'm following basically what the orchestra is doing in the sense that I'm also playing 16th notes, which is 4 notes per beat. But Yoonah, the clarinet, is playing 5 notes per beat, but only sounding 4 of those 5 notes. So she's also playing 4 notes, but they're a little bit faster than everybody else's 4 notes, because 5 of them could fit in a beat rather than 4 in a beat. So they're a little bit more bunched together, and that kind of
I'm like agitating.
Yeah, spurs me on. So she's kind of like, come on, come on, come on, come on. So to me, that kind of is already a shift in the relationship between the 2 instruments. Kind of now she's kind of the one prodding the violin versus the violin leading earlier on in the piece.
So
That's so interesting. Eric, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say I can play a little excerpt of this page so we can get that in their ears. I'll do that quickly. A lot of notes, strings.
And then this section seems to lead into a real storm of some sort brewing in the orchestra, starting right where you're showing it, Eric, at bar 266. When I looked at this page the first time in the score, it looked to me like an EKG reading of somebody, you know, having a stroke or something. It's the jagged lines, right, of the layers of the lines and the chaotic turbulence in the violin too there. It's a devastating episode. It continues for some 30 bars, I guess. And in the midst of it, the soloists come in and sort of cry to each other, feels like across this incredible turbulence. And finally, the strings gradually flatline. It looks like a flatline on an ER screen or something at bar 297, and they just stay static to the end. So Eric, tell us about this intense section.
Well, this is really the climax of the piece, and here we arrive on C, and it turns into almost, it's C major that we have here. So a big major chord arising out, and as you can see, all the different divisions we have, divisions of 5 against 7, against 4, against 3, against 6. Here I was also thinking about the gesture of the string players and that they're repeating each of these notes with new bow strokes. And so to have the string players all moving their bows at different speeds, you get this texture of like a teeming mass. And here with this technique that we have, the string players move over across their whole range of the bow. And I almost thought of it as like wings taking flight. So we're soaring in the sky, and then the 2 soloists emerge like wafting like birds above. So could take a brief listen to this.
Wow. And this passage gradually collapses and collapses down till we get to the cadenza. And as we know, in most double concertos, cadenzas are a place to show off and to compete with each other as soloists. But in this instance, it's very, very different. Here, the clarinet is taking the lead. As Stefan mentioned earlier, the clarinet becomes the sort of instigator of action. And in this cadenza that is so quiet and lovely, it's as if the clarinet's role is teaching and coaxing, accompanied by a very subdued, almost flatlined violin here in this case. And I wondered, what this section was about. And Yoonah, how did you feel when you're playing each note of the motive of the rising theme and just one at a time handing those notes to Stefan?
Yeah, so like we have mentioned before in the beginning, the introduction is all about the string world and Stefan's sorrowful rhapsodic lament. And then the clarinet comes in kind of hidden in the string world. And it sounds as if like you can't really tell which instrument is playing. And then by the fast section, the clarinet already kind of has its own voice and is kind of has developed a character for itself, I feel. And by the cadenza, the clarinet takes over that ascending melody that the violin had. I can't sing in pitch, but and now the clarinet is taking that motive and reteaching it in the clarinet's own character and own voice to the violin, and kind of slowly, step by step, as if I'm teaching a baby how to walk, teaching him how to sing it in a clarinet voice, because also the violin is now just playing long held notes that the clarinet hands off. And that long held note is something, it's a character that the clarinet, I think, kind of embodies even from the beginning. The clarinet is just holding a long note. And I do think that's something that I love. I have mentioned this to Eric before, that I can circular breathe and I like to circular breathe. And I think maybe that's why he was inspired to write such long notes. But yeah, I think that's my view on this cadenza. And I love the marking where Eric says encouragingly teaching, and that's only on my part and it's not on Stefan's. And I love to play this cadenza just as if I'm really just teaching him how to talk, how to walk.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a clear shift or reversal even of her first entrance when she took over my pitch. Now I'm taking over her pitch, and then she ascends to the next high pitch. And like you said, like an infant learning how to walk, when the leader shows, hey, it's safe to go to this higher ground, then I am brave enough to take over her pitch, and then she climbs again, and then I follow her lead. And just personal note that for both of us, actually, Eric mentioned that we are a couple, and actually we got married during the pandemic last year in June. So we're almost a year into our marriage. And we decided at the wedding to write our own vows. And when I was writing my vows, was sort of like thinking about like meaningful, happy experiences that we had thus far in our relationship. And working on this piece together was definitely a highlight of our time together. I particularly remembered that image of the clarinet Yoonah being sort of like tenderly teaching and guiding and coaxing. And I put this instruction from Eric into my vows, saying like I felt like this was a really great representation for me of the role I think Yoonah, one of the roles that I think Yoonah has in my life, sort of like this very generous, benevolent kind of like guide and like tender wisdom. So yeah, you really did a number on me with this cadenza, Eric.
Wow, I'm so moved to hear that. That's just beautiful. Well, congratulations again to both of you. So, to learn from one another is the best, best partnership. So maybe we can take a listen to all of this now, and I've consciously, Danielle and I have consciously played the audio recording so you could listen and have that in your ears. But now we're going to play an actual video of the performance so you can see the gestures and see their trading off of, especially in this cadenza. So we'll pull this up and then we'll take a listen to this. About 15 minutes. And then we'll have time for questions afterwards. Bravo, bravo to you both. What a phenomenal performance.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for this beautiful piece.
My
I'm so
pleasure.
touched. Every time I listen to it, I get touched.
Same listening to you two players and with Dongmin and YCP. I'm really looking forward to the NEP, who's co-commissioned it as well. We will hear it next year, I'm certain. So at this point, I'd love to invite those in the audience, if you have any questions for any of us, to post them in the chat, and we will see them as they get forwarded along to us here. But in the interim, I thought I wanted to ask Yoonah and Stefan, what have you been up to in this pandemic year? I know it's been difficult for all of us in the music world where performances are canceled, and I know you've mentioned playing more duets together at home, but what have been your outlets for creativity this year?
For me, I really missed chamber music, ensemble playing. So of course, Stefan helped me get that pleasure, but also at the same time, I started recording myself playing and also doing like a multi-video and posting like a cappella videos a lot. So it's like me playing a quartet with myself. And so I've been doing a lot of those kind of recordings and, being more active on social media the past year.
And also, Yuna has been doing some really, really great transcriptions of various pieces for violin and clarinet, which is a lot of fun to play. Yeah, and I have been spending my hours, days, weeks, months, and years, sometimes productively, sometimes not productively. Spent a lot of time watching Netflix. Spent some time playing the violin. A new project that I've been working on since August is something called Stefan Sessions, which is a free online class on Zoom for music lovers and violin students. And basically once a month, I lead a Zoom session where we take a deep dive into a specific piece. We've covered a bunch of the major violin concertos. 2 days ago, we did one of the Bach solo violin partitas. And prior to each session, I open up applications where people can submit videos of themselves performing the repertoire in question on YouTube. And then I choose 3 outstanding young violinists to sort of serve as like guinea pigs and perform a bit of excerpts from the piece live on Zoom. And then I kind of share my thoughts and experiences and what I think this music is about to whoever is on Zoom. And it's been growing steadily. We have now, I think, over 650 people have signed up to watch these things. And it's totally free. If you're interested in music, you can tune in. Next one will be announced soon. So that's been something really fun. And then also just sort of enjoying our new life together has been super fun.
But also you started a faculty position at Manus.
Oh, that's true. I joined the violin faculty at Manus officially in December. So I've been sort of working on building a studio there. So that's sort of a new chapter in my life also that I'm looking forward to starting in the fall. And also, I guess we talked about this before we went live, but Yuna also is going to be starting her doctorate at Juilliard, which is amazing.
So we're both
going back to school.
No, I found that the teaching this year I teach at Brown, and that has really been a guiding light too through these times, and just helping the students, but also learning from them too, and all their excitement and where they're going with their own work and music. So I think the having the teaching element, that's becoming a theme of today's talk, the teaching and learning. This is so important. So I see we have 2 questions. One's for me. What is next for you in double concerti? What instrument combination would you like to write for next? That's an interesting question. I haven't thought of another double concerto. I would like to write a violin concerto, and I'd like to write a trumpet concerto. I'd also like to write a clarinet concerto. So those are just ones off the top of my head. But the interesting combinations of instruments. I do this one I would probably never have written it had I not gotten the invitation to do so. So a lot of the projects that I do write come from invitations, and that serves as a creative spark. So I do like, if you are interested in a concerto, you can pitch one, a kazoo and a snare drum. Yeah, maybe that would be an interesting one. Yeah. One more, I guess, here. From initial conception to completion, how long did it take to compose double concerto? So this, it was a bit of a compressed timeline. It was during my sabbatical year, and I had a number of projects that I accepted to compose. And so this one took about 2 months from conception to completion. The first month was spent pretty much lots of false starts and hair pulling and not quite knowing where I was going. And then I think it was New Year's Eve. That's where I decided I just started to pretend to play the violin. And I was like, the physical act of making music helped just get the notes out of me. It was, instead of just being intellectual about it, saying this is the melody I'm thinking of, but to just stand there and feel the music. I got the opening that night, and then January 1st, I think also the start of the year is like a clean slate, new, let's begin. So I wrote it mainly in January that month, but it's a pretty quick for me. It was a pretty intense month of writing. Well, I'm curious, both Yoonah and Stefan, what's next for you on the horizon, music-wise? I know Yoonah's going to Juilliard, but other projects that you have coming up that maybe you could share with us.
Since a lot of orchestral concerts, including with the NEP, have been canceled, most of my performances these days have been with my piano trio, who I've become increasingly active with. The group is called the Junction Trio. It's myself and the cellist Jay Campbell, who's also in the Jack Quartet, and the pianist and also composer Conrad Tao. And we've been together as a group for about 6 years now, but especially because of the pandemic, with chamber music kind of being the only opportunity for people to attend live concerts because it's just easier to put a few people on stage, we've actually been busier than ever before as a trio. So that's been nice. So the month of May is quite surprisingly busy with the trio. And then, well, this summer you're performing in Korea. Mm-hmm. And I unfortunately will not be able to join in Korea, but I'll be kind of festival hopping here in the US.
Wonderful. Exciting with some travel ahead too. We feel good to do that. Great. Well, if there's no more questions for today, it really was such a pleasure to have you both here, and thank you, Danny, too, for your insightful comments and look into my music and leading us through all of this today. So thank you, Yoonah and Stefan, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and so I'll end with thanking the audience. Thank you all for joining us. And if you've enjoyed this program, please consider making a donation to the New England Philharmonic to support future events like this. Your contribution goes completely to the programming for our season, and your support is greatly appreciated. You can make a donation through the link in the bio below. And if you enjoyed this event, mark your calendars for our next listening in session, which will be May 9th, same time, same place, here on YouTube with Diego Rocha, composer who is also the winner of the 2020 New England Philharmonic Young Composer Competition. And Diego's work will be presented next year in our season. It was initially scheduled for this year, but we're really looking forward to hearing it next season. And so you can also visit the NEP's website for all the latest information about upcoming programs at nephilharmonic.org. So thank you for joining us, and have a good evening.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thank you.